Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked at the stars ahead. The year was 2157 and humanity had finally learned to travel faster than light. They had built colonies on 12 different worlds, and now Jake was leading the most important mission in human history. His ship was called the New Horizon, and it carried the hopes of every human alive. Jake was 42 years old with gray hair and calm blue eyes. He had fought in 3 wars, but now he wanted peace more than anything else. Next to him stood Dr. Lisa Shun, who knew more about alien languages than anyone on Earth. She was small and smart with black hair tied back in a simple way. Commander Rick Barnes stood at the weapons station, but his guns were turned off. Rick was Jake's best friend since military school and had saved his life twice in battle. The 4th member of their team was Helen Carter, who spoke for Earth's government. She carried documents that could create friendship between humans and aliens. They were traveling to meet the Zephyrian Empire for the first time. The Zephyrians lived on a world called Kepler 442b, and they had technology that could help humanity grow stronger. But Jake did not want their technology through war. He wanted it through friendship and trade. That was why his weapons were off and his shields were down. That was why he carried gifts instead of bombs. The New Horizon dropped out of hyperspace near the Zephyrian homeworld. Jake saw massive space stations floating in orbit around the blue and green planet. The stations were made of silver metal and glowed with purple lights. They were beautiful and scary at the same time. Jake had never seen anything so large built. By thinking beings, Lisa worked at her computer to send a message to the aliens. She had learned their language from radio signals that traveled between stars. The message was simple and clear. Jake Morrison came in peace. He wanted to talk and learn and share. He had no weapons ready and no plans for war. He only wanted friendship between their peoples. The Zephyrians answered after 1 hour. Their leader was called Admiral Vexstar, and he spoke in a voice like grinding metal. The alien said Jake could come to their main station, but only with a small group. Jake agreed quickly. He took Lisa, Rick, and Helen with him on a small shuttle. The shuttle had no weapons and no armor. It was just a simple ship for carrying people. When they reached the alien station, Jake saw the Zephyrians for the first time. They were tall and thin with gray skin that looked like stone. Their heads were large and their eyes were black like space itself. They had crystal pieces growing from their skulls that glowed with soft light. They wore robes made of metal cloth that moved like water. Jake thought they looked both ancient and advanced. Admiral Vexstar met them in a large room with walls made of crystal. The alien was 8 feet tall, and his crystal pieces glowed brighter than the others. He spoke to Jake through a machine that changed his words into human language. Jake bowed the way Lisa had taught him and offered his gifts. The gifts were beautiful things from Earth. There was music from every human culture saved on crystal discs. There were paintings and sculptures made by the greatest human artists. There was poetry written in 100 languages and scientific knowledge about how humans had learned to travel between stars. Jake explained that these gifts showed the best of what humanity could create and discover. Admiral Vexstar seemed interested in the gifts. He asked many questions about human culture and history. Jake answered honestly about everything. He told them about human wars, but also about human peace. He spoke about how humans had learned to work together to build their colonies and explore space. He explained that humans wanted to learn from other species and share what they knew, but then the Admiral asked harder questions. He wanted to know where human military bases were located. He asked about human weapons and defenses. He demanded maps of human space and lists of human ships. Jake felt uncomfortable with these questions, but he tried to stay polite. Jake explained that he could not share military secrets because that would break his orders from Earth. But he said that humans only built defenses to protect themselves from pirates and dangerous creatures. He promised that humans had no plans to attack anyone and only wanted peaceful relations with the Zephyrian Empire. The Admiral's crystal pieces began to glow brighter when Jake refused to answer the military questions. Other Zephyrians entered the room and they all looked angry. Lisa whispered to Jake that something was wrong. Rick moved closer to Jake and Helen gripped her diplomatic papers tighter. Admiral Vexstar spoke to the other Zephyrians in their own language. Lisa tried to understand, but they spoke too fast and used words she had never heard before. She caught only a few words that meant danger and invasion and threat. Jake felt his heart beat faster, but he kept his face calm. The Admiral turned back to Jake and said that humans seemed dangerous to the Zephyrian Empire. He said that any species that refused to share military information must be planning for war. Jake tried to explain that humans were peaceful, but the Admiral would not listen. Any more. What happened next changed everything forever. The Admiral made a signal with his hand and suddenly alarms began to sound throughout the station. Red lights flashed and Zephyrian soldiers ran into the room with weapons ready. Jake raised his hands to show he was not dangerous, but the soldiers did not care. Admiral Vexstar spoke one last time to Jake Morrison. He said that the Zephyrian Empire would not allow dangerous species to threaten their territory. He said that Jake's peaceful words were lies meant to hide human plans for conquest. He said that the galaxy would be safer when humanity was stopped. Before they could grow stronger. Jake tried to speak, but laser beams filled the air around him. The New Horizon exploded in space while Jake and his team died in the alien station. Their last message to Earth was cut off in the middle of a word. The man who came in peace was killed for trying to make friends. The Zephyrians sent a message to all human worlds. They said that humans had tried to attack their empire but failed. They said Jake Morrison was a spy and a warrior disguised as a diplomat. They warned that any human ship entering Zephyrian space would be destroyed immediately, but Jake Morrison had come in peace, and the aliens had shot him down for no reason except fear and hate. The news of Jake Morrison's death reached Earth 3 days later when the emergency beacon from the New Horizon finally transmitted its last message. President Amanda Walsh was eating breakfast when her aide burst into the room with tears in her eyes. The message was short and terrible. Jake Morrison and his entire crew were dead, and the Zephyrians claimed they had been spies and attackers. Amanda Walsh was a strong woman who had led Earth through many difficult times, but this news made her hands shake. She called for an emergency meeting of the United Colonial Council within 1 hour. Representatives from all 12 human worlds would meet by video link to decide what humanity should do next. Colonel Peter Hayes ran the Colonial Intelligence Service, and he brought bad news to the meeting. The Zephyrian Empire was much larger and stronger than humans had known. They controlled 17 star systems and had a military fleet with over 3,000 warships. Even worse, they belonged to something called the Galactic Hegemony, which was a group of old alien species that controlled most of the galaxy. Dr. Nathan Cross was Earth's expert on alien thinking and behavior. He explained to the council that the Zephyrians had probably killed Jake's team to show other alien species that they were strong. Old alien civilizations did not like young species like humanity because they feared losing their power and control over the galaxy. The Zephyrian message to human space was broadcast on every communication channel. Admiral Vexstar appeared on screens across 12 worlds and told his version of what happened. He said that Jake Morrison had approached their territory with weapons ready and shields up. He claimed that human ships had tried to scan Zephyrian defenses and map their military positions. He said the Zephyrians had acted in self-defense when they destroyed the New Horizon, but the worst part was what came next. Within hours of the Zephyrian broadcast, other alien species began to support their story. The Galactic Hegemony announced that they believed the Zephyrian version of events and condemned humanity for attempting to start a war. They demanded that humans withdraw from all contested star systems and submit to hegemony oversight of human expansion into space. Trade routes that had taken humanity decades to establish were closed overnight. Alien merchants who had been friendly to humans suddenly refused to answer their messages. Species that had seemed interested in learning about human culture now acted like humans carried a dangerous disease. Humanity found itself alone in a galaxy that had turned hostile in just a few days. Captain Maria Santos had been Jake Morrison's teacher at the military academy 20 years ago. She was now 55 years old with silver hair and scars from 3 different wars. When she heard about Jake's death, she requested permission to lead a mission to investigate what really happened. President Walsh approved the mission even though it was dangerous. Maria took her ship, the Defender, to the place where the New Horizon had been destroyed. What she found there made her angry enough to fight the entire galaxy by herself. Pieces of Jake's ship were scattered across space, and there were no signs that any weapons had been fired from the human vessel. The hull fragments showed that the New Horizon had been destroyed by surprise attack, while its shields were down and weapons were off. But the most important discovery was a data recorder that had survived the explosion. Maria's crew managed to repair the device and recover video footage from the New Horizon's final minutes. The recording showed Jake Morrison approaching the Zephyrian station exactly as he had reported. His weapons were offline, his shields were down, and he was broadcasting peaceful messages in the Zephyrian language. The footage also showed the moment when the aliens opened fire without warning. Jake had been speaking words of friendship when laser beams cut through his ship. There was no attack by humans and no threatening behavior. Jake Morrison had died while trying to create peace between species that had never met before, Maria transmitted this evidence to Earth and to every government in human space. But when the humans tried to share the footage with alien species, they found that no one wanted to see it. The galactic hegemony dismissed the recording as fake and created by human computers. They said that humans were skilled at making false evidence and could not be trusted. Even worse, some alien species that had been neutral in the conflict now began to side with the Zephyrians. They said that young species like humanity were naturally violent and dangerous. They claimed that humans had probably been planning to attack Zephyrian territory and were only upset because their secret mission had failed. Dr. Cross explained to the government that this reaction made sense from the alien perspective. Most species in the galaxy had taken thousands of years to develop space travel and advanced technology. Humanity had achieved the same progress in just a few centuries. This rapid development made older species nervous because they worried that humans might become too powerful too quickly. The isolation of humanity became complete when the hegemony announced new trade restrictions. Any species that continued to deal with humans would lose access to hegemony markets and technology. Since the hegemony controlled most of the galaxy's advanced civilizations, this threat was enough to cut off almost all contact between humans and aliens. Human colonies near Zephyrian space began to report strange ships at the edges of their sensor range. These vessels never came close enough to be identified, but their presence made the colonists nervous. Families started packing their belongings and requesting transport back to safer human worlds. 3 entire colonies were abandoned within 6 months as people fled from expected alien attacks. The economic damage to humanity was severe. Human industries that had been built to trade with alien species suddenly had no customers. Scientists who had been working on joint research projects with alien partners found themselves cut off from vital information. Exploration missions to new star systems were canceled because humans could no longer count on alien support if their ships ran into trouble. President Walsh tried everything she could think of to restore peaceful relations. She sent messages to every alien government offering to submit to neutral investigation of the incident. She promised that humanity would accept any reasonable restrictions on their expansion if it would prevent war. She even offered to have Jake Morrison's family publicly apologize for any misunderstanding that might have caused the conflict. But nothing worked because the galaxy had already decided that humans were guilty. The older alien species were comfortable with their version of events and had no interest in hearing evidence that contradicted their beliefs. They had spent thousands of years building their power structure, and they would not let a young species like humanity disrupt their control. As months passed, it became clear that peaceful solutions were impossible. The galaxy had judged humanity without listening to their side of the story. They had condemned Jake Morrison as a liar and a spy when he had actually been a hero who died trying to build bridges between different worlds. The mood on human worlds began to change from sadness to anger. People who had supported peaceful exploration now demanded that their government take stronger action. Veterans of the colonial wars volunteered to return to military service. Factories that had been building civilian ships started retooling to produce military vessels. Jake Morrison had come in peace and they had shot him down like a criminal. Now humanity was learning that the galaxy respected only strength and that peaceful intentions were seen as signs of weakness. The time for talking was over and the time for action was about to begin. 6 months after Jake Morrison's murder, the people of Earth voted Amanda Walsh out of office. They elected General Clark Thompson, who had spent 40 years in the military and understood that sometimes peace could only be achieved through strength. Thompson was 68 years old with white hair and steel-gray eyes that had seen too much war. He had fought against robot armies that nearly destroyed humanity and won battles that saved entire worlds from destruction. Thompson's first act as president was to activate Operation Prometheus. This was a secret military program that had been planned since humans first learned they were not alone in the galaxy. The operation was designed to transform humanity from a peaceful exploration species into the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Kate Williams was put in charge of building the largest fleet in human history. She was 45 years old and had never lost a space battle in 20 years of service. Kate had black hair with streaks of silver and a voice that could make admirals twice her age follow orders without question. She understood that the coming war would be different from anything humanity had fought before. General Troy Mitchell took command of the ground forces and special operations. Troy was a giant of a man who stood 7 feet tall and had muscles like steel cables. His face was covered with scars from fighting robot soldiers during the AI rebellion. Troy had personally destroyed more enemy machines than any other human soldier, and now he would teach aliens what human warfare really meant. Dr. Sandra Lewis ran the Terra Research Institute, where humanity's best scientists worked on military technology. She was a small woman with bright red hair and green eyes that missed nothing. Sandra had invented the fusion reactors that powered human ships and the computers that controlled human weapons. Now she would create tools of war that would make aliens fear the name of humanity. The military buildup began immediately across all 12 human worlds. Factories that had been making civilian goods were converted to produce weapons and warships. Mining operations expanded to gather the metal and rare elements needed for the largest construction project in human history. Every human world became a fortress preparing for the war that was coming. Kate Williams designed the new human fleet around one simple idea. Human ships would be faster, stronger, and more deadly than anything aliens had ever built. While alien species relied on energy shields and plasma, weapons humans would use kinetic projectiles that could punch through any defense. Human ships would carry missiles that could destroy entire space stations and railguns that could crack planets. The centerpiece of the new fleet was a class of ships called Vengeance cruisers. These vessels were 800 meters long and carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Each cruiser had 12 heavy railguns, 60 missile tubes, and 100 fighter craft. The armor was made from materials that could survive direct hits from nuclear weapons. The engines could push the ships faster than anything aliens had ever seen. Troy Mitchell worked with Sandra Lewis to develop new weapons for human soldiers. They created armor that could stop alien energy beams and helmets that could see through alien cloaking technology. They built rifles that fired projectiles at hypersonic speeds and grenades that could collapse entire buildings. Most importantly, they developed tactics that used human advantages in speed, aggression, and adaptability. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker volunteered for the most dangerous mission of the preparation phase. Steve had been Jake Morrison's student at the academy and blamed himself for not being on the New Horizon when it was destroyed. He was 32 years old, with brown hair and blue eyes that burned with anger at the aliens who had killed his teacher. Steve's mission was to infiltrate Zephyrian space and gather intelligence about their defenses. Human doctors performed surgery to make him look more like a Zephyrian and implanted devices that would fool alien scanners. Steve learned to speak their language perfectly and memorized every detail of their culture and customs. The infiltration took 3 months of careful planning and dangerous travel through alien territory. Steve used a captured Zephyrian ship and false identification documents to reach their homeworld. Once there, he posed as a trader from a distant Zephyrian colony and gathered information about their military capabilities. What Steve discovered made the entire human leadership angry enough to declare war immediately. Admiral Vextar had been promoted to Supreme Fleet Commander and was considered a hero for destroying the peaceful human mission. The Zephyrians were celebrating what they called their greatest military victory and had built monuments to commemorate the destruction of the New Horizon. Even worse, Steve learned that the Zephyrians were planning to attack human colonies within the next year. They believed humans were too weak to fight back and wanted to claim human territory for their own empire. Vextar had convinced the galactic hegemony that humanity needed to be eliminated before they could become a threat to established alien powers. Steve also discovered the location of every major Zephyrian military base and the specifications of their most advanced warships. He learned that Zephyrian technology was impressive but designed more for intimidation than actual combat. Their ships were large and beautiful, but not as heavily armed as they appeared. Their soldiers were trained to fight other aliens who followed predictable patterns but had never faced an enemy like humanity. When Steve returned to Earth with his intelligence, President Thompson called a meeting of the military leadership. The room was filled with admirals and generals who had spent their entire careers preparing for this moment. Thompson looked at each of them and spoke words that would change galactic history forever. The president explained that humanity had tried peace and been answered with murder. They had offered friendship and been met with lies and threats. The galaxy had chosen to see humans as weak and cowardly creatures who could be bullied and destroyed without consequence. It was time to teach the galaxy that human restraint was a choice, not a weakness. Admiral Williams reported that the human fleet was ready for war. She had built over 2,000 warships, including 50 Vengeance cruisers and 300 destroyers, designed specifically for attacking alien targets. The fleet was larger than anything humans had ever assembled, and more powerful than most alien empires could field. General Mitchell confirmed that human ground forces were prepared to fight on any world the aliens chose to defend. He had trained 1 million soldiers in new tactics designed to exploit alien weaknesses. His troops carried weapons that could penetrate alien armor and equipment that could operate in any environment aliens might use as a battlefield. Dr. Lewis presented the final piece of the human war machine. She had developed artificial intelligence systems that could coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously. These computers could process information faster than any alien mind and predict enemy movements with incredible accuracy. The AI systems would give human forces advantages that aliens could not match or counter. President Thompson issued his final ultimatum to the galactic hegemony through every communication channel humanity could access. The message was simple and clear. The aliens would acknowledge the truth about Jake Morrison's peaceful mission and formally apologize for his murder. They would pay reparations to the families of the New Horizon crew and guarantee safe passage for human ships through all galactic territories. If the aliens refused these reasonable demands, then humanity would take by force what should have been given freely. The galaxy had 1 week to respond before human ships would begin their advance into Zephyrian space. After that point, there would be no more talking and no more chances for peaceful settlement. The aliens rejected the ultimatum within hours and threatened to destroy any human ship that left colonial territory. They called humanity arrogant and foolish for challenging powers that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They promised that human civilization would be crushed and scattered to serve as an example to other young species, but the aliens had made one critical mistake in their calculations. They had assumed that humans were like other species that took centuries to build military power and generations to develop warrior cultures. They did not understand that humans had been fighting wars since before they learned to use fire and had turned warfare into an art form that no alien species could match. Jake Morrison had come in peace and they had shot him down without mercy. Now 2,000 human warships were about to teach the galaxy what happened when humanity decided that talking was finished. The human war fleet launched from 12 different star systems at exactly the same moment. Admiral Kate Williams commanded the assault from her flagship Retribution, while General Troy Mitchell led the ground forces from the assault carrier Vindication. 2,000 human warships moved through hyperspace like a dark storm heading toward Zephyrian territory with one purpose in mind. The first target was Outpost Zeta-9, which guarded the outer edge of the Zephyrian star system. The base was built inside a large asteroid and housed 3,000 alien soldiers along with a squadron of patrol ships. The Zephyrians had built it to intimidate other species and show the power of their empire. They never imagined it would become the first casualty of human vengeance. Commander Ryan Foster led the advance force of 50 destroyers that emerged from hyperspace without warning. The human ships appeared on Zephyrian sensors like ghosts materializing from nothing. Before the aliens could even send a distress signal, human railguns opened fire with devastating accuracy. The kinetic projectiles traveled at tremendous speed and hit the asteroid base like hammers striking glass. Each shot punched through the alien armor and exploded inside the facility, causing massive damage. Within 10 minutes, the entire outpost was destroyed and every Zephyrian inside was dead. The patrol ships that tried to escape were hunted down and eliminated by human fighters. Admiral Williams broadcast a message on all Zephyrian communication channels before the next attack. The transmission showed footage of Jake Morrison approaching their space station with weapons offline and shields down. It showed him offering gifts and speaking words of peace. Then it showed the moment when Zephyrian weapons cut him down without warning or justification. The message was simple and terrifying. Jake Morrison had come in peace and they had murdered him. Now humanity was coming for revenge and nothing would stop them until justice was served. Every Zephyrian military installation would be destroyed and every officer responsible for Jake's death would pay with their lives. The human fleet moved deeper into Zephyrian space like a spreading fire that consumed everything in its path. Captain Angela Price commanded a squadron of heavy cruisers that attacked the mining station at Kepler 7. The facility was supposed to be protected by an energy shield that could stop any weapon, but human kinetic projectiles passed through. Like it was made of paper, the destruction was methodical and complete. Human forces targeted military bases, weapons factories, and shipyards while avoiding civilian areas. They wanted the aliens to understand that this was not random violence, but calculated punishment for specific crimes. Every target was chosen to weaken Zephyrian military power and demonstrate human precision in warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Carter led the first human ground assault on a Zephyrian world. His Marines landed on the planet Nexus 3, where the aliens had built their largest military academy. The facility trained officers for the entire Zephyrian fleet and was considered the heart of their military tradition. The Zephyrian defenders had never faced human soldiers in combat and were unprepared for the speed and aggression of the attack. Human troops moved faster than alien eyes could follow and struck from directions that seemed impossible. Their weapons cut through Zephyrian armor like it was made of cloth, and their tactics confused alien commanders who were used to predictable battles. Major Julie Watson commanded the assault on the Academy's main building, where Admiral Vextar had once studied as a young officer. Her soldiers moved through the corridors like deadly shadows, eliminating resistance with brutal efficiency. Within 6 hours, the entire facility was under human control, and every Zephyrian military instructor was either dead or captured. The psychological impact of the human attacks spread faster than the physical destruction. Zephyrian soldiers who had considered themselves elite warriors began to panic when they realized how outmatched they were. Reports from the front lines described humans as unstoppable killing machines who felt no fear and showed no mercy to military targets. Admiral Vextar watched his empire crumble from his command center on the Zephyrian homeworld. The alien who had ordered Jake Morrison's death was now seeing his own people die in the thousands. His proud fleet that had intimidated other species for generations was being systematically destroyed by humans who fought like demons from ancient nightmares. The Supreme Fleet Commander sent desperate messages to the galactic hegemony, begging for assistance against the human assault. He explained that his forces were being overwhelmed by enemies who used weapons and tactics that no alien species had ever developed. He warned that if humanity was not stopped, they would become a threat to every civilization in the galaxy, but the response from the hegemony was silence. The older alien species had suddenly discovered urgent business in other parts of the galaxy and claimed they could not spare ships to help the Zephyrians. They had expected an easy victory over primitive humans and were terrified by reports of overwhelming human military superiority. Captain Maria Santos led a special mission to capture the space station where Jake Morrison had been murdered. She commanded a force of elite soldiers who had volunteered specifically to avenge their fallen comrade. Maria remembered teaching Jake at the academy and had promised his family that his death would not go unpunished. The assault on the station was swift and brutal. Human boarding parties cut through the hull with plasma torches and poured into the corridors like an unstoppable flood. Zephyrian defenders tried to make a stand but were crushed by superior firepower and training. Within 2 hours, Maria stood in the same room where Jake had died and planted a human flag in his memory. The final battle of the campaign took place in orbit around the Zephyrian homeworld. Admiral Vexstar led the last squadron of his fleet in a desperate attempt to stop the human advance. His ships were outnumbered 10-1, but he hoped that defending their home system would give his warriors the courage to fight harder than ever before. Admiral Williams met the Zephyrian fleet in open battle with 50 Vengeance cruisers and 200 escort ships. The engagement lasted only 30 minutes because human weapons and tactics were so superior to anything the aliens could field. Zephyrian ships that had once terrorized other species were torn apart like paper dolls in a hurricane. Vexstar's flagship tried to escape when the battle turned hopeless, but human fighters caught it before it could reach hyperspace. The Supreme Fleet Commander, who had murdered peaceful diplomats, was captured alive and brought aboard the Retribution to face human justice. Admiral Williams had the alien brought to the same briefing room where Jake Morrison had once planned his peaceful mission. Vexstar stood in chains before the human officers who had avenged their fallen comrade. Williams played the recording of Jake's final moments and watched the alien realize that his victims had been completely innocent. The trial was broadcast throughout the galaxy so every species could see what happened to those who murdered human diplomats. Vexstar was found guilty of war crimes and executed by firing squad while cameras recorded every moment. His last words were a plea for mercy that fell on deaf ears, just as Jake Morrison's words of peace had been ignored. But Admiral Williams was not finished with her message to the galaxy. She ordered her ships to target every monument the Zephyrians had built to celebrate Jake's death. The structures were blown apart by human weapons, while Williams explained that anyone who honored the murder of peaceful humans would see their pride turn to dust. The Zephyrian Empire surrendered after 3 weeks of total warfare that destroyed their military power completely. Their government sent messages of submission to every human commander and begged for mercy from the species they had tried to destroy. They offered to pay any price and accept any terms if humanity would spare their civilian population. General Thompson arrived at the Zephyrian homeworld with a full diplomatic mission to accept the alien surrender. But this was not the same kind of diplomacy that Jake Morrison had offered. This was the diplomacy of victors who had proven their strength and would dictate terms to those who had underestimated human resolve. The galaxy watched in shock as humanity demonstrated that they could be as devastating in war as they had been hopeful in peace. Species that had dismissed humans as weak and primitive now competed desperately to avoid becoming the next target of human vengeance. The lesson was clear and terrible. Humans offered friendship to those who reciprocated, but brought overwhelming destruction to those who chose violence instead. The final assault on the Zephyrian homeworld began at dawn when human Marines landed at strategic points across the planet. Colonel Ben Carter and Major Julie Watson led their troops through the capital city while orbital bombardment eliminated the last military installations. The aliens who had once considered themselves masters of the galaxy now cowered in their homes as human soldiers, marched through streets that had never known the sound of foreign boots. The planetary defense centers fell within hours as human technology proved superior to everything the Zephyrians had built. Their energy shields failed under kinetic bombardment and their weapons could not penetrate human armor. Zephyrian soldiers who had trained their entire lives for war discovered that they were children playing with toys compared to human warriors, who had perfected the art of violence. President Clark Thompson arrived on the conquered World 3 days after the fighting ended. His ship landed at the main spaceport where thousands of Zephyrian civilians watched in silence as the human leader emerged surrounded by his bodyguards. Thompson was dressed in a simple military uniform with no decorations except for a small pin showing the insignia of the New Horizon. The surrender ceremony took place in the same building where the Zephyrian government had celebrated Admiral Vextar's promotion after murdering Jake Morrison. Now those same halls echoed with the voices of human translators as Secretary of State Paul Henderson read the terms of Zephyrian capitulation to their defeated leaders. The terms were harsh but not cruel. The Zephyrians would formally apologize for the murder of Jake Morrison and his crew. They would acknowledge that the human diplomatic mission had been completely peaceful, and that their attack was unprovoked aggression. They would pay massive reparations to the families of the dead, to humanity as a whole for the costs of the war they had forced upon the galaxy. Most importantly, the Zephyrians would provide complete intelligence about the galactic hegemony, including the locations of military bases, the capabilities of member fleets, and the political structure that had allowed them to condemn humanity without evidence. They would serve as human allies in future conflicts and provide bases for human ships. Throughout their territory, the Zephyrian Prime Minister was an old alien named Kelanash who had ruled his people for over a century. He signed the surrender documents with hands that shook from age and fear while human cameras recorded every moment for broadcast throughout the galaxy. The alien who had once commanded 17 star systems was now a servant of the species he had tried to destroy, but President Thompson was not interested in ruling over conquered aliens. He had come to establish a new order in the galaxy based on respect for human power rather than submission to ancient alien traditions. Trade Representative Carol Johnson began negotiations with Zephyrian merchants to reopen commercial relationships on terms favorable to humanity. The response from the rest of the galaxy was immediate and dramatic. Species that had refused to deal with humans after Jake's death now sent urgent messages offering friendship and alliance. The same aliens who had dismissed human evidence of Zephyrian crimes now competed to be the first to acknowledge human territorial rights and diplomatic status. Admiral Kate Williams received dozens of communication requests from alien fleet commanders who wanted to discuss mutual defense treaties. General Troy Mitchell was invited to military academies across the galaxy where alien officers hoped to learn human tactics and strategies. Dr. Sandra Lewis found herself overwhelmed with requests for scientific cooperation from species that had previously ignored human research. The galactic hegemony collapsed within months as member species abandoned the alliance that had failed to protect them from human retaliation. Ancient civilizations that had controlled galactic politics for thousands of years suddenly found themselves isolated and powerless as younger species aligned themselves with humanity. Dr. Nathan Cross established the Morrison Institute for Galactic Relations in honor of the man whose death had changed everything. The institute was built on the exact spot where Jake's ship had been destroyed and served as both a memorial and a research center. Its mission was to ensure that peaceful contact between species became the norm rather than the exception. The institute's first project was to create new protocols for first contact situations. These rules were based on Jake Morrison's example but backed by the certainty that any species who harmed peaceful human diplomats would face overwhelming retaliation. The galaxy learned that human friendship was genuine but human vengeance was absolute. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker was promoted to captain and given command of a new class of exploration vessels. These ships carried the same peaceful equipment that Jake had used but were escorted by heavy cruisers that could destroy entire fleets. The message was clear. Humans still wanted to explore and learn and make friends, but they would never again trust alien promises of safety. Captain Maria Santos became the first human ambassador to the reformed Galactic Council. The new organization was based on equality between species rather than domination by older civilizations. Humans held veto power over any decision that affected their interests and could call for military action against any member that violated peaceful contact protocols. The most dramatic change was in how alien species viewed humanity itself. Before the war, they had seen humans as primitive newcomers who could be bullied and controlled. Now they understood that human restraint was a choice rather than weakness, and that human military capabilities far exceeded anything they had imagined possible. Young alien officers studied human battle tactics at military schools across the galaxy. Alien engineers tried to reverse engineer human weapons technology, but found that human innovation moved faster than their ability to copy it. Alien diplomats learned to speak carefully when dealing with human representatives because they knew that insults could lead to devastating consequences. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Human manufacturers found themselves with more orders than they could fill as alien species competed to buy human products. Human explorers discovered new worlds and resources that had been hidden by the old alien powers who wanted to maintain their monopoly on galactic wealth. Colony ships began leaving human space again, but this time they traveled with military escorts and carried settlers who were ready to defend their new homes. The age of human expansion had begun, and no alien power dared to stand in their way. Within 5 years, humanity had established 30 new colonies and controlled the most important trade routes in the galaxy. Admiral Williams retired from active duty but remained as an advisor to the new generation of human military leaders. She often visited the memorial station that had been built where Jake Morrison died and reminded young officers that their strength existed to protect the peaceful values that Jake had represented. The memorial itself became the most important monument in human space. Every human child learned about Captain Jake Morrison, who had carried gifts to alien worlds and died trying to build bridges between different species. His statue stood in the center of the station with words carved beneath it that summarized the lesson his death had taught the galaxy. The inscription read simply, "Captain Jake Morrison came in peace. They shot him down. We came back with vengeance. Let the galaxy remember both." The message was seen by every alien diplomat who visited human space and reminded them that humanity offered two choices to other species. They could choose friendship and cooperation, or they could choose to face human military power. President Thompson served 2 terms in office before retiring to write his memoirs about the war that changed galactic civilization. His book became required reading at military academies throughout human space and was translated into over 100 alien languages. The title was simple and direct: Peace Through Strength. The Jake Morrison story. Dr. Sandra Lewis continued her research but now focused on defensive technologies that could protect human colonies from any future alien attacks. She developed shield systems that could protect entire planets and early warning networks that could detect hostile fleets from dozens of light years away. Her work ensured that humanity would never again be caught unprepared by alien aggression. The Zephyrians themselves became valuable allies once they accepted their new position in the galactic order. Their advanced manufacturing capabilities were put to work building human designs, and their territorial knowledge helped human explorers avoid dangerous regions of space. Former enemies became partners in the new civilization that emerged from the ashes of the old hegemony. 10 years after Jake Morrison's death, the first human Galactic Congress was held on Earth with representatives from over 200 species in attendance. The opening ceremony began with a moment of silence for the man whose peaceful mission had ultimately brought more species together than any diplomatic effort in galactic history. Captain Angela Price, now Admiral Price, delivered the keynote address to the assembled delegates. She spoke about the lessons that had been learned from the tragedy of first contact and the changes that had followed the human victory over those who thought peace was weakness. Her words were broadcast to every world in human space and translated for alien audiences across the galaxy. Price reminded the delegates that Jake Morrison